different price. Anything they were to buy would have been much different. I understand that. But what I want you to understand is this. Don't think that they were being paid the same amount that we get paid today in America. Because there was no such thing as a minimum wage at that time in America. And so what Roosevelt does is he decides to push an agenda. And it actually was not a bad agenda. I'm not going to come before you and say it wasn't a bad agenda. Oh, which, by the way, is a sub-point to that particular idea about the young people making money. You know, that was also a different time period when it came to where young people could spend their money. Right? They weren't going to the mall and buying a $100 pair of jeans or $200 pair of shoes. You know, Currys were not on their mind. LeBrons or whatever they call them were not. Hey, I can't wait to work and save this up and to go get my pair of Currys. That didn't happen. Where do you think their money went? Back to the family. Back to the family. And if the child got any of that money out, it would have been usually the father who would have said, you can have X amount of the money. Can you imagine that happening today? Son goes to work, daughter goes to work, brings home the paycheck. And dad says, all right, let's add that here. We got to buy groceries this week. You know, you like to use the internet. You like to watch TV. We got to pay the cable bill. And the child says, you're right, Dad. I can't wait to give you all of my money that I just earned. Thank you so much for providing a life for me. You think that would happen in most homes in America? All right, son, here, give that back. We need to buy groceries. We got to pay the internet bill, pay the cable bill. You like to talk on a cell phone and you like to drive a car. Yeah, but that's what you pay for. My money goes to McDonald's. And I'm saving up to buy the new pair of jeans, of which those jeans cost more than probably any pair of jeans your dad ever owned in his closet. What I'm saying is this, our culture is really weird. And it's really changed. In my time across the country, I've met one young person. When I would ask, and I used to do this, I would say, raise your hand if you come home and you ever ask if you could help financially with your family. Do you ever offer to buy groceries that week? Do you ever offer to pay the cable bill that month? Do you ever offer to pay the internet bill? Do you ever offer anything? I've met one kid in America who came up to me, he was in Los Angeles, and he said, I do that. I go to work and I come home and support my family. But the problem was, he was the main breadwinner for his family at the age of 16. Most young people aren't doing that. You say, Joe, how did we get distracted in America? How did things change? I'm going to show you that. In 1938, there was something that was introduced called the Fair Labor Standard Act. And the Fair Labor Standard Act actually imposed a minimum wage. If you want to know where minimum wage comes from, it comes from this act from 1938. And it also limited the number of hours that a young person could work in a given week, depending upon if it was school day, depending on if it was summer, or whatnot. These particular statistics, I believe, come from the state of Tennessee. At that time, that's where I was at, but you can look up what it is in the state of Georgia. Chances are it's going to be very similar to that. Now, I want you to also understand this, though. In around that time period, 1938, what is about to happen in America? What has just happened in the world and what was about to start happening in the world? Well, you think about the bigger picture, and what you're going to find out is it was in that time period, World War I was over, World War II was about to begin. I want you to think about that time period. You say, that's when we came up with the Fair Labor Standard Act? Absolutely. It was also around that time that a man by the name of G. Stanley Hall started coining the phrase and started really putting out the concept of adolescence. You see, remember what I told you earlier? You were either a child, you were an adult, or you were a person of old age. There was none of this subgroups, well, that's just them being an adolescent. That didn't start coming about until much later. And so what we discovered was, well, we created a separate subgroup within this idea of a transition from a child to an adult. And we called it adolescence. Well, also what we saw was, after this talk started to happen, we started to see a shift. And that would make sense, considering in 1938 they said you have to pay a child a certain fair labor and you can only work them so many hours. As an employer, I would probably look at that and say, wait a minute, I've got to pay that man the same amount as I have to pay that child. but I can work the man longer hours. All of a sudden you say, what happened? Well, a couple things happened. Number one, what the Great Depression did not do to the job force, right, to the opportunities, the Fair Labor Standard Act completed. And so what we saw was a time period in our nation's history where 6% of the 17-year-olds earned a diploma. By the 1940s, the majority of people earned a diploma. Now here's a transition in what happened. What happened was you saw young people around, mainly adults, working side by side with their fathers, their mothers, or other adults in a particular job. And in a very short period of time, they started entering a classroom where there was one teacher and probably 20 to 30 students that were their peers. Now some people would look at that and say, well, that's where they need to be. They need to be around their peers. Really, let me ask you a question. Morally speaking, for anybody who's ever studied the morals and ethics of America, I understand there's a lot of factors that play into this, but let me ask you a question. Are we better morally and ethically today than we were back then? Or have we become so desensitized to the downward spiral of moral and ethics that we've just become accustomed to? I will tell you this, and it just is what it is. You know we're not from here. Walking through Savannah yesterday, we noticed as we were walking there was rainbow flags on one building. The more we looked, there were a lot of rainbow flags on that building, and I'm guessing they were not celebrating the covenant between God and Noah. I'm guessing that's not what they were celebrating. Orlando, Florida, there's an entire district where one of the worst churches that I've spoken at before. They fly an American flag on one side, and they fly a rainbow flag on the other. It was down there near where the shooting was in the club in Orlando. I don't say that because, well, that's just one issue. No, God died for individuals who fly the rainbow flag, just as He died for us, or Jesus died for them as He died for us, right? You understand that? So that's not a, well, God doesn't like those people. No, God loves them, just like He loves you. That's not the point. The point is, have we gone down the tubes morally and ethically today as compared to what we were back then? You say, Joe, there's so many factors. I understand that. But I'm also not going to be naive to say one of those factors is it possible we started changing a few things in America. And those changes, did they benefit us or not? Well, what we find is that over the years, what happened, we had more and more young people that were being born. And in particular, when you look at this birthing chart, which I know you young people are really excited about that, let me go back to that. The birthing chart points out one of the largest groups of young people ever to be born in a particular generation. It's called the baby boomers. The only group that even rivals the baby boomers, and I don't know if they've passed them over today, are the young people that are called the millennials, is what one group calls them. If you've ever done any cultural studies, you'll come to find out sometimes those lines are blurred as to what they are. And even some people would say that children still being born today are the millennials, and then other people will say that 9/11 marked the beginning of a new cultural group, a new generation. You think about it, and today, I know from my standpoint, as I think about this, my children, and our oldest is coming up on 14, they've never known America before there was this talk of terrorist attacks. Do you understand that? Sometimes we as adults, we remember what it used to be. My children don't know what it's like to not talk about having terrorist attacks talked about in America. Yours don't either if they're young. They have no clue what America used to be. I'll never forget, Aaron and I married in October, right? September 11th, we married in October, show up at the airport to go on our honeymoon, and I'll never forget a Humvee with military armed guards outside of the Nashville airport. And I'd flown before, and I'd never seen that. You recognize our kids today don't even know what it is to go into an airport and to be able to walk with your loved one to the gate. You remember back in those days? Where you got to say goodbye while they got on the plane? My kids have no clue about that. All they hear is about me talking about it in my seminar talk. Things changed. Well, what happens is things changed with the baby boomers. Post-World War II, what we saw was a serious increase in discretionary spending. It was a booming time in America. Things were great. New employees, new home buys, new car sales, and even young people had more money to spend. Well, if people have money to spend, what do you think is going to happen in that culture? You're going to have vultures that come in and say, we want some of that money. Well, around that time period, there was a new subgroup that was starting. It was called teenagers. Are you aware the word teenager was not even in our vocabulary before World War II? It wasn't even in our vocabulary. We had words like tweeners and things along those lines, but never the concept as it is today of teenager. And so what happened was people came in and they said, we've got to get some of that money. But the way they did it was through marketing of a social nature. These are ads from that time period of Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and both of them talk about the social aspect of their drinks. Take a tip from the crowd, get a Pepsi. The Coca-Cola one says, everybody welcomes the Paul's that refreshes with ice cold Coca-Cola at bright and cheerful soda fountains. It's a moment that brings friends together to enjoy the pure refreshment of this sociable drink. And around that time period, it seems like we have an increase in the visiting to soda fountains. The idea, you think back at that time period, well, what is your idea of the post-World War II? What have you seen it portrayed as? What have you known it as you lived through it? And what happened was, when it came to teenagers, there was an increase in the social aspect, and the marketing showed that very well. We also see this. There was a music kind of movement that took place. Teenagers have always had their songs. That wasn't the issue. You think back to the Roaring 20s, and you probably think back to the jazz era if you know your history very well. But you see, there was a moment or a movement that occurred amongst young people after World War II, unlike we've ever seen before, where you had radio disc jockeys that were taking money under the table and got into some big trouble for it, for what they were doing. But they had special balls, they had special concepts that were going on, because at that time period in America, we were still very racially divided. And so there is something, if you study the history of music in America, there's something called race music. And what it was, just quite frankly, it was music that sounded a whole lot like other stuff that would come later. The problem was in the racial divide within America, it was not acceptable at that time for a suburbia white American teenager to listen to what was called race music. Now, here's what happened. There was a guy who came on the scene that sounded an awful lot like, not exactly, but he sang very much so alike. Except his version, some would say, is even being called rockabilly. He was an individual who came on the scene out of Tupelo, Mississippi. He had the color of skin that was accepted in America at that time. He had a voice and he had looks. But the problem was, suburban white America still didn't even like him initially, because he liked to shake his hips a whole lot. He went on the Ed Sullivan Show at least twice, right? Ed Sullivan, I think is what it was. Yes. And the second time Ed Sullivan made the statement, he's a pretty good young man. When he said that, and it's weird the power of some of these TV personalities, when he said that, this individual became accepted in that particular culture, and the music took off, and teenagers were already flocking all over this stuff, but they were flocking all over what at that time was called race music. They would sneak downstairs because the DJs would play that at night after the parents were asleep, because not every room had a radio. You had one family radio in the living room. Well, now, since this guy came on the scene, it became socially acceptable. Does anybody know who this man is?
Elvis Presley.
Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley. Please understand, I've researched the music history, and I don't know everything about it. Some of you may know a whole lot more. But Elvis Presley wasn't anything new. Elvis Presley was at the right time in America to do what he was doing. And it's unfortunate when you start looking at those individuals that came before him that sang very similar and sang very well, but they didn't get the credit because of the color of their skin. It is an interesting study in American history, but I go back to it from the standpoint of the teenage demographic was shaped not only through marketing, but it was shaped through music. But you see, it was also shaped through magazines. Up to that point in time, we were raising children to become their parents. And all of a sudden, the magazine came on the scene around this time period called 17 Magazine. That is the front cover of 17 Magazine. I don't know if you're aware of that. That is the front cover of the first issue. And you can see how scantily clad she is. And you can see how longingly she's looking into the camera as she wants to kiss you through the camera. And it talks about how much she needs to lose weight and please her man. It doesn't say any of that, because that wasn't the culture of the time. It was a big deal when this magazine came out, created by a 54-year-old grandmother who said, I want a piece of the pie. They have money to spend and I want some of their money. She came out with a magazine where the advertisements in the magazine, listen, laundry soap, Pond's makeup. I don't know a teenager today that wears Pond's unless her mom makes her wear it. Because the deal was young ladies were being raised to become their mothers. And so therefore the advertisements were even geared towards becoming their mothers. People look at that and say, well, they should have the right to choose. Oh, 17 Magazine believed the same thing. And after the 60s and after the 70s, they will recount how they were a great advocate in the feminist movement of America. And celebrate the fact that they were a part of the feminist movement in America. And so when you look on the shelf today, which I would encourage no one to do, and you see the magazine, what you see is something totally different. And it is sad to me. And you heard me make a joke about what the front cover had. But do you realize today, 9 out of 10 magazines that are geared towards women, they have 2 subjects that are repeated in 9 out of 10. One of them is dieting, and one of them is something to do with the physical desires of their man. On the flip side of that, 1 out of every 10 magazines geared for men have something to do with those 2 subjects. You know why that irritates me? Because we are training women in America that outside of what you look like,